Hello everyone, and welcome to the Group By lecture for pandas. In this lecture, we're going to show you how to use the Group By method to allow you to group rows of data together and call aggregate functions. Now, before we actually jump into the Jupyter Notebook, let me quickly explain what Group By is in case you don't have SQL experience or SQL experience, where most people are familiar with what a Group By statement actually does. To put it simply, Group By allows you to group together rows based off of a column, and then perform some sort of aggregate function on them. For instance, in this example here, we have three partitions of IDs, 1, 2, and 3, and then we have several values for them. We can group by the ID column and aggregate them using some sort of aggregate function. An aggregate function is basically just a fancy term for any function that takes in many values and then spits out or outputs a single value, such as taking the sum of a bunch of values and outputting the result, or taking the average or standard deviation, etc. These are all aggregate function, and that's all a group by method does. It allows you to choose a column to group by, it gathers all those rows together based off that column value, and then you perform some sort of aggregate function on it. Alright, with that being said, let's go ahead and learn how to use group by with pandas. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the Jupyter Notebook. Alright, so here we are at the Jupyter Notebook. I went ahead and copied and pasted this line of data. It's basically just a dictionary from the notebook, and this notebook is just called Group By, and it's under the pandas folder. Okay, you can go ahead and type this out manually, but I would just say go ahead and copy this data. It's just a dictionary, and then you can go ahead and say pd.dataframe, and then pass in that data dictionary, and it should automatically then create a data frame that looks like this. And basically this is just some made-up data. We have a company column with 3 company codes, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. Then we have a person column with a bunch of unique people in it. And then we have some sales numbers, 200, 120, etc. Now what we can do is use the group by method to group rows together based off of a column name. For instance, let's go ahead and group by the company. I'm going to go ahead and say df, and then you say group by, you call it as a method, and you pass in the column you want to group by. In this case, I want to group by the company column. And notice what I get out here. If I just do this, I will get a group by object, and it just points to where it's stored in memory. What I can do is store this as a new variable. So I can say something like by comp for by company, and now I have this group by object. Then the second step of using group by, after you've grouped by that column, is to go ahead and call some sort of aggregate function on it. So for example, if I wanted to get the mean by company, it would look at the sales column and give me the mean or average sale by the company. The reason it can't do this for the person column is because these are strings, and there's no way you can just take the mean of a string. And that means pandas just automatically ignores anything that's a non-numeric column. Likewise, we can go ahead and perform other aggregate functions, such as sum of everything as far as sales per company. You can even do standard deviations with STD, etc. And you should notice that what I get back is an actual data frame with an index called company and the column value of sales. And that means I could do stuff such as index off of this. So I could say by comp, let's go ahead and sum up all the sales by company. So I have that sum of sales by company, and then I could even call something like .loc FB. And that gives me the sales sum of Facebook. Now a lot of times what you're going to be doing is not actually setting this group by object as a variable. You'll probably just call this all in one line once you start getting really comfortable with pandas. You'll say something like group by company, then you'll call something like sum, and then if you just wanted for Facebook, you would call FB. And that's all the same thing, just in one line now. Some other useful aggregate functions that you may find yourself doing are things such as count, which just counts the number of instances per column. And in this case, it was able to return the person column because it's able to count how many instances of a person occur in that column per company. So we have 2 people and they have 2 sales each, and that makes sense. You can also do things such as max and min. And note here that it also returns the person because Python is able to store things in alphabetical order, and that's basically what it's trying to show here. The max is the latest towards the end of the alphabet, and if you call min, that's the earliest in the alphabet. So you can see we have A's and C's here. However, you probably shouldn't be using min or max with a string column. You'll probably use all these aggregate functions really with numeric columns. One last useful thing I want to show you with group by is a lot of times you can use group by with the describe method, and that gives you a bunch of useful information all at once. So you can say df.groupby, the company name, and then say describe, and it will give you a bunch of information. So for instance, the count, the mean, the standard deviation, the min, and the max, as well as the quartile values for each company. And if you don't like this formatting, you can actually transpose this. So you can say something like .transpose if you prefer each company to be a column instead of an actual index. So whatever format you like better, you can describe to that. And then you can actually just call column names off of this if you're just interested in a single company or a single column. All right, that's really it for group by. It's quite basic. You just call the data frame, say .group by, the column you want to group by, and then whatever aggregate method you want. Remember, it has to aggregate the column values to a single value. And it usually only works on numeric columns depending on what kind of aggregate function you're working with. We'll get a lot more practice with group by as we go through the exercises as well as the capstone projects. All right, thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture.